Imagine a kingdom where the crown itself is cursed, where kings vanish into prisons, queens raise armies, and entire families are wiped from history with the stroke of a sword. For more than 30 years, England tore itself apart in a brutal civil war between two rival branches of the same royal family. It was a war fought not for freedom, but for power, a relentless struggle of betrayal, ambition, and bloodshed that would come to be known as the War of the Roses. And at its heart stood not just battles and banners, but a question that haunted a nation. Who had the right to wear the crown? The air is thick with tension as banners of white roses and red roses flutter in the chill wind, their designers' intricate blooms symbolizing more than mere beauty. They are the chivalric face of an unrelenting civil war. The War of the Roses, a bleeding struggle for the throne of England, fought not on distant shores, but across the green meadows and cold, damp dungeons of home. This is the tale of two branches of the Plantagenet family, the House of Lancaster, their emblem a bold red rose, and the House of York, their emblem a proud white rose, locked in a tortured dance of ambition, betrayal, and holy oath. It is the story of kings and rebels, of bright young princes and aging dukes, of fierce knights and desperate common folk. It is a story that begins gently, but soon spirals into tragedy and fierce conflict spanning decades, consuming families and reshaping a kingdom. To understand the War of the Roses, one must first peer back, decades before blood was spilt openly in the streets of London or across the fields of northern counties. We trace the roots of this conflict to the reign of Edward III, whose many sons spawned rival claims that would, over subsequent generations, ferment into bitter enmity. Edward's eldest, Edward the Black Prince, died before his father and left only a weakened heir, Richard II. Meanwhile, his other sons, especially John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, and Edmund of Langley, Duke of York, planted the seeds of dynastic division. Over time, favour shifted, power consolidated, and alliances formed and fractured. Fast forward to the turbulent reign of Henry VI, weak, devout, and often absent-minded, whose incapacity to rule opened a yawning rift in English governance. His queen, Margaret of Anjou, determined and tenacious, refused to give up the power that Henry could not wield. In the mid-15th century, Henry's inability to defend English territories in France, notably the loss of Gascony, was but the first crack in a fragile monarchy, hastening unrest. As the 1450s passed, noble factions vied for influence over the king, and the noble blood of York began to stir with both calculated caution and defiant ambition. Richard, Duke of York, son of Edmund of Langley, saw not only the failures of Henry's rule, but envisioned himself as the rightful defender of realm and crown. Quietly, he garnered support among nobles and common soldiers alike, disillusioned by Henry's weakness. Meanwhile, Queen Margaret, determined to preserve Lancastrian power and her own son's inheritance, moved to block York's influence, deepening the fissures between factions. York's second rise, proclaimed in 1460, came at Northampton and then at the fateful Battle of Wakefield in December of that year. Before Wakefield, York's power seemed within reach, a seeming inevitability, but fate turned sour as his army was surrounded and his opponents fierce. Though the exact account varies, it's said he cried out that he surrendered under safe conduct, yet Lancaster's Sir Richard Clifford and a host of Lancastrians slew him anyhow. His head was supposedly placed on a pike above the gates of York, a grisly warning. The murder of Richard, Duke of York, jolted the conflict into deeper waters, and his supporters rallied around his surviving son, the 15-year-old Edward, Earl of March, who carried the White Rose into the next battle. But reign worsened. In February, York's son Edmund, Earl of Rutland, fell at Wakefield too. Still, out of the darkness emerged Edward IV, swift, cunning, and ruthless. At Mortimer's Cross in February 1461, Edward faced Lancastrian forces under Owen Tudor and Jasper Tudor. In that field, east of Hereford, the battle turned on a sudden frost and a flickering sun that beamed through drifting clouds in alignment with three suns. An atmospheric miracle that Edward, keen on symbolism, took as a sign of divine favour. His men, spurred by this omen, broke the enemy ranks. Bolstered, Edward marched south, reaching London and claiming the crown in March 1461, becoming Edward IV. His crown glinted red in the sun, his authority bold and confident, but the war was far from over. The next massive clash came at Towton, March 29th, 1461, the bloodiest battle fought on English soil. Icy wind tossed flecks of snow in vast pools across the fields, swirling in the faces of soldiers wielding steel and instinct. Between 17 and 20,000 men perished in this single day of carnage. Frozen bodies lay as testimony to the tide already turning. Edward's victory at Towton was decisive. He had secured his throne, forced Henry VI and Queen Margaret to flee north, but Margaret was not vanquished, and she followed her king loyally, gathering support across the sea and in distant strongholds. Years passed in uneasy equilibrium. Edward IV ruled with severity and style, balancing Yorkist lords. But that beating heart of conflict never stopped, for Henry VI lived on, and Margaret schemed to return. The fortunes of both sides flowed with each court intrigue, each wager of gold, each hastily inked treaty. Edward's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville in 1464, while strengthening his English ties, alienated the powerful Earl of Warwick, the kingmaker, whose own ambitions were as stung by the sudden rise of the Woodvilles. Warwick had been the scourge of the Lancastrians and the architect of Edward's rise, yet found himself marginalised. Rivalries flared. Warwick, seeking power in his own right, claimed he desired only stability for the realm, but his plotting grew audible. Then Yorkists and Lancastrians twisted into an unlikely alliance. Warwick allied with Margaret and Henry, facilitating Edward's deposition in 1470. Edward fled to Burgundy. Henry reigned once more, his second restoration engineered by those who once detested him. But the brief reinstallation looked fragile, as if constructed atop reeds. Warwick marched the Yorkist army south, while Edward prepared to strike back, rallying foreign support and secretly crossing the Channel. On April 11th, 1471, Edward and Warwick finally cornered each other at the Battle of Barnet, under cold June skies thick with fog and confusion. At dawn, a stray trumpet call, mistaken orders, threw Yorkist ranks into disarray. Warwick, mistaken for an enemy, found himself exposed. Amid the chaos, he was cut down. His life ended in betrayal by fate's own signal. His body burned on the battlefield, his dust carried by the wind, and Edward's path to restoration cleared. Soon after, on April the 14th, 1471, at Tewkesbury, young Edward of Westminster, Prince of Wales, Margaret and Henry's only son, and the last Lancastrian heir, rode in the Yorkist trap. Shields clashed amidst the Somerset meadows. The prince fell. Some say slashed down in battle. Others whisper he was dragged from hiding and executed. Either way, the male Lancastrian line lay broken. Moments later, Henry VI, imprisoned in the Tower, was carried off, either by unspeakable massacre in the grip of the Yorkists or by Lancastrian retainers seeking to prevent his rescue. His death remains wrapped in mystery. With Henry's passing, Edward IV stood unopposed, the red rose trampled, the white rose unblushing in triumph. All seemed resolved. Yet, as decades would prove, dynastic peace was a fragile dream. Edward IV ruled with confidence until his sudden death in April 1483, leaving behind an heir, Edward V, scarcely 12 years old, and a kingdom burning with fresh ambition. The Duke of Gloucester, Edward's brother, declared the boy illegitimate, seized the crown as Richard III fathered on whispers of a prior Edward pre-contract of marriage. The claim was both cunning and scandalous. Edward V and his younger brother were led to the Tower under the guise of preparation for coronation and vanished. Their disappearance sparked outrage, suspicion, and resentment. Rumours echoed: murder in the night, murderous ghosts of past betrayals. Richard, now Richard III, held tight to the throne, but the scent of treachery haunted him. Across the Channel, his niece, Elizabeth of York, married to Henry Tudor, Earl of Richmond. A Lancastrian claimant became the figurehead of united opposition. Those loyal to the Red Rose, by now weary of Yorkist ascendancy, yet burned by betrayal, rallied around the hope of a fresh dynasty, one that might mend the torn crown and the wounded land. In August 1485, the stage was set. On a grey Sunday morning, on the slopes of Bosworth Field, near Market Bosworth, the two armies faced each other. A damp fog clung low, the smell of wet earth hung heavy, and both sides knew that only one could emerge victorious. Richard, armoured in black and determined, led his troops from the front. Bold, chivalrous, but perhaps reckless. Henry Tudor, smaller in number, rode with care, backed by men loyal not to York or Lancaster, but to peace and the promise of union. The battle swelled into carnage. Richard, seeking to cut the head from the snake, charged directly toward Henry. In a moment of thunderous desperation, his horse was struck. He was unhorsed. The bodyguards around Henry held firm. The Yorkist king, last of his line, final Plantagenet, fell beneath a thrust that echoed through English history, and with Richard's death, the War of the Roses was over. Yet the White Rose and the Red Rose did not fade into obscurity. In a moment of bold symbolism, Henry Tudor ascended as Henry VII and married Elizabeth of York. The union of the houses, sealed in wedding vows, merged the red and white into the Tudor rose, the emblem of a new age, one born from centuries of grief, bloodshed, and longing for peace. Now, let us dwell a moment on the human dimension. Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick, the kingmaker, not merely a backroom manipulator, but a man of fierce loyalty, shifting ambition, and tragic end, cut down by the very chaos he engendered. Margaret of Anjou, lion-hearted, strategic, fiercely protective of her son. Her performance on the battlefield at Tewkesbury exemplified both courage and despair. Edward IV, a king of contradictory temper, capable of political finesse and cold ruthlessness, his reign shaped by personal charisma and the fickle currents of favour. And Richard III, a man both damned by history and in modern reappraisal, considered complex, as a loyal brother or a regent who fell victim to myth. Imagine the common folk: widows, orphans, villagers in scattered shires, caught between York and Lancaster, watching fields turn into battlegrounds, paying diffidence and taxes, burying friends and kin. For every earl slain, there were countless farmers whose ploughs lay idle. For every crowned head lost, there were children learning to fear drums in the night. This was not merely a royal quarrel. It was a slow corrosion of English life, a rupture that ran deep into the bones of the land. Yet through it all, the memory of chivalry remained, banners held high, trumpets calling, knights charging in steel and faith, and once faltering kings struck down with shock and sword. The War of the Roses was England's great civil storm, a dynastic hurricane leaving ruin, uncertainty, and eventually, a new beginning. Let's close our journey by reflecting on what this war changed. The medieval feudal order, grounded in martial loyalty and aristocratic ambition, began to shift. Central authority grew stronger. The Tudors, inheriting both crown and battlefield, built on the vision of union. The nobility was subdued. A stronger monarchy emerged. The glimmering tapestry of courtiers, royal favourites, candles in great halls, it gleamed all the brighter afterward. In the centuries that followed, poets, playwrights, painters, chroniclers carried forward the legend of this war. Shakespeare, centuries later, gave voice to these kings and warriors, shaping how we remember them. The ambitious Richard, shaken by ghosts, the brooding Henry, the valiant Edward, the noble woe of Margaret. Every generation looked back and found in this conflict a story of ambition and remorse, lust and loyalty, destiny and doom. And so when you see the heraldic roses today, the red and the white, remember they were not benign florals, but above all, they were signs of families who spilt blood to claim a sliver of sovereignty. They were the silent witnesses of England's civil wars, the roses that presided over a kingdom torn by brothers and bound anew in the name of peace. And they teach us this, that out of the ashes of rivalry and rebellion, sometimes, through the fiercest of fires, a fragile peace can rise, if new roses are drawn from old wounds. Thus ends our immersive narrative journey through the War of the Roses. I hope this continuous, richly woven script carries you from the earliest roots of dynastic rivalry through the brutal battles and tragic downfalls, all the way to the quiet, determined unification under Tudor rule. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please help support this channel by subscribing. Until next time.